don't they make more movies like that? I know I've asked that question before, and so have you probably, and our parents, and maybe even our kids. We all want to see more of the kinds of movies that we want made, but we don't really do anything about it. Sheryl Anderson asked the same question, but she didn't let the question just float away. She decided to do something about it. Making the movies you want to see, it's what we're talking about right now. Welcome to Right Now. I'm your host, Jennifer Shookman, and today's guest, I think this is really inspiring because while we've all stood around and said, I wish they'd do more of that, she's actually gone out and done more of that. Today's guest is Sheryl Anderson, and Sheryl is a TV writer and novelist who hasn't met a genre she doesn't like, which means she works in a lot of different areas. She writes comedy, drama, sci-fi, family, and procedurals. She sold pilots to NBC, Disney, Lifetime, Sci-Fi, and her most recent work has been on Up and Hallmark. We're so happy to have you here today, Sheryl.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
You are welcome. I want to hear more about your work, but first I want to start with, how did you actually get into the business?
I actually studied playwriting in college and thought that I would move to New York and be a starving artist because, you know, I'd seen all those movies. And then a friend of mine who was a couple of years ahead of me in school moved out here and started working in film and TV. And she said, you should really think about coming to Los Angeles because the money's better and the weather's better. So I came out here and it was intriguing, all the different options. And there were several of us from our college who all came out here at the same time. And so it just felt like the direction God was pointing me in. Oh, and I still love New York, but I'm very glad I came here.
Yeah, I think, isn't that the saying is that you go to New York for the art and you come to LA for the money or something like that?
I would see the truth in that.
Was your family supportive of you moving to LA?
Absolutely. I mean, my mother said, I'm really sorry that you're going to go so far away. But even when I went to college and was majoring in theater, my father said, these are the gifts that God has given you, and you might as well commit to them fully now, because who knows what opportunities lie ahead. And so when I got out of school and started talking about coming out here, again, he said, well, that's probably what you're supposed to do.
That's amazing.
It was.
Most people don't have that kind of support from their family and their parents.
Well, you know, I caught a glimpse of that in college because I had a lot of friends who did theater but were majoring in business and psychology and chemistry. And I was grateful then for my parents' unconditional support and continue to be. My parents are gone now, but I know they're still watching over me, and my brother is my biggest champion. And I told God when I had children, I said, I certainly hope that I will find the strength to support them the way my mom and dad supported me. And so now I have a costume designer, writer, daughter, and an actor, writer, son. So
great.
I guess the support will continue to the next generation.
So do you write like pilots and things that you like, they would be great for this pilot? Like my son would have the starring role. And
well, we have talked about that a little bit, but you know, they're both incredibly talented and sort of forging their own paths. But what I love is that they're both great storytellers too. So we can sit around and bounce ideas off of each other, and they work for me on projects, and I really value their input.
It's a really beautiful legacy that your parents had and that you're passing on
Absolutely.
down. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
One of the things that was really important for you was not just to come out here and, you know, hope to make it, is you really wanted to be sure that you were really good at your craft. You wanted to be a good writer. Talk about that and why that was important to you.
Well, I feel that I was given a gift, and to be a steward of that gift is really important to me. And so I can't just sort of throw myself out on the marketplace and say, okay, God, you do the rest. I have to continually hone my craft. And so every script I write, I try to make sure that it's substantially better than the last one, even though I've been doing this for a while. And also, when I got to a point where it was appropriate, I started teaching. And not only was that my way to give back, but a way to mentor the next generation. But I also feel like by teaching, I get better.
Yeah. Yeah.
That whole speck in somebody else's eye, log in your own. It's really easy to take a student script and go, look at why Act 2 doesn't. Oh, I bet that's what's wrong with my current script. So I get a lot of joy out of it, but I get a lot of practical use out of it, too.
It's so true. When you're looking at other people's work, you start to begin to see things you didn't see in your own before. It's real easy to spot in someone else's, but yeah. Well, when you first got started, I imagine that there was a little bit of rejection, maybe once or twice you had things turned down or people said no?
Oh, we're talking about once or twice to the 1,000th power, right? I mean, it's so interesting because I think we all do this. We all write our bios so that it looks like it was just smooth sailing. You leave one project, you go to the next, and that doesn't happen for anybody. Even people who work consistently will tell you, yeah, but I really hoped I was going to be over here or over there. And I mean, you just have to understand going in that rejection is 95% of it. And you just have to be ready for those 5% of the doors that open.
95% is a huge percentage. Mm-hmm. So you come out to do something that you feel like you're gifted, you feel like God's called you to do.
Absolutely.
You're getting 95% of the things rejected.
Right.
How does your faith play into that and help you to, at what point do you go like, maybe I heard God wrong, or maybe I really should have been a business major?
Oh, God and I have had a lot of those conversations. We used to call them kitchen floor episodes because it's sitting on the kitchen floor at 3 o'clock in the morning going, maybe I should have gone to law school.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
And I remember very vividly having a conversation with my father, who was a military officer, and so had come from a very regimented world where you understood that A led to B, led to C, and he had a very successful, decorated career. And he would say to me, how can you keep doing this? And I said, well, if God wants me to stop, he needs to speak up. And every time I felt like I had hit bottom, and I would say, I surrender, something wonderful would happen. And I'd be like, okay, so I'm not supposed to leave yet. So, of course, when I would get frustrated, I'd be like, I surrender. And he'd say, no, you don't. So people have said, how can you be a Christian in Hollywood? I don't know how people can be in this business without a faith to support them, because it is hard. And you question why you're here, what you're doing, why you're with the people you're with, why you're not with the people you'd like to be. And Romans 8 is my favorite chapter in Scripture. At some point, you just gotta let it all go and know that your cries are being heard and that you're on the path and that you just have to keep working.
And not confusing the voice of a producer who's rejected your script with the voice of God, I assume.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
Because they can seem one and the same sometimes.
God and producers are pretty easy to distinguish.
That's awesome. All right, talk about being in the writer's room, because you've been in a lot of different situations like that. Is your Christian worldview welcomed and people want to hear more from you and have that sort of voice included?
It depends on the room. Okay. It depends on the show. I do not come in guns blazing, plant my flag and say, you know. What I tend to do is say, here's my worldview. Anybody who's been in a room with me knows what follows when I start off. I'm a Lutheran and I see this as, you know. So I share my worldview, and certainly if people want to hear more, I am open to sharing. Sure. But what I'm hoping is that people see me living the best life that I can and doing my best to be a good Christian in a tumultuous world, and want to know more about that.
I want to talk more about that.
Sure.
And I want to get into maybe some specific examples of some shows you've worked on and some pushback that you may have had either in a room or from people in the outside room. I think that there's a lot we can learn, because we all may not find ourselves in a writer's room, but we've probably found ourselves in a room where people weren't sure that they wanted to know what we had to say about a situation,
Sure.
or weren't sure that we really were in it. But we're going to take a break, and we're going
Okay.
to come back with Sheryl, and we're going to hear more about this. What happens inside a writer's room when you're a Christian voice and maybe no one else is? And what happens in the church when people say, you're working on that show? We'll find out more when we come back. Welcome back. We're talking with Sheryl Anderson about what it's like to be a writer in Hollywood and to be in a writer's room where some people welcome your viewpoint and others don't. You've said in the past to me that there are times when you can be overt about your faith and times where you can be covert. Talk about maybe an instance where each of those happened.
Well, if you're in a room where faith is a comfortable subject for people to discuss, then you can talk about it plainly and say, this is a faith issue, or based on my faith tradition, here is what I think this character would do. What's very interesting, and this is sort of a meeting of the two worlds, is that I was on Flash Gordon on Sci-Fi, and we were talking about an episode and the A story, and I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, this is John the Baptist in prison. And my showrunner, who had gone to Catholic school, understood completely what I was talking about. And so we discussed that scene in those terms. And I was so excited because, I mean, Flash Gordon, there's a chosen one and there's a terrible king. And I mean, it just fits so beautifully. But if you see the episode, we don't talk about John the Baptist. We don't talk about Jesus in the middle of Flash Gordon. And so that's sort of how you can be covert in that I call it stealth theology. The gospel is always on my heart when I'm writing, and thematically I'm looking at how can I express my faith. Is this an episode about stewardship? Is it an episode about redemption? Which of the fruits of the Spirit can I communicate in this story? And so I think sometimes Christian artists are so eager to share that they let the message overcome the story.
Yeah.
And that defeats things on both sides.
Sure.
Because you're not doing good art
Right.
and you're not communicating your faith well at the appropriate moment. And so I believe, and like I said, I'm a Lutheran, and that's a tradition that's very supportive of the arts, but I also believe that you have to find your moments. Speak when people will hear, and not stand on the street corner making a show of yourself, as it were. And so whenever I have the opportunity to be overt, I mean, I will pitch these characters have this discussion if it's appropriate,
Right.
or in pitching out a series, I'd like to see this family go to church. I mean, the fact that the Simpsons go to church more than any other family on TV.
That happened. Yeah.
But then there are other places where it's just not appropriate.
Right,
But that doesn't mean that you can't be thematically theological. And as I said, tell stories about redemption and forgiveness and love and the other important aspects of our faith that we should be sharing every day just by the way we live.
Yeah. We need to have other examples in the Bible, because some people who will never read the Bible will watch Flash Gordon, for example.
Exactly.
But I think this kind of goes back to what we started talking about. It's really important for you to be good at the craft.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, if it becomes proselytizing, the story's no good, and no one wants to watch it.
Exactly.
But if you have taken the time and the care to really understand the craft, you can figure out how to weave these themes in without anybody knowing that that's exactly what's happening.
Exactly. And I told my kids as they were growing up, as your mother, as a Christian and as a writer, I have a responsibility to protect you from bad art as well as bad theology. And so I try to point them toward great art that also has a great message, and away from sort of clunky, here's a sermon and we're going to try and wrap a story around it.
Yeah. And I think that's what we see with all due respect, artists are working where they're at, and hopefully everybody gets better and grows. But we do see a lot of bad Christian art. Is that fair to say? And sometimes it gets the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater then, because people are like, well, that filmmaking or that writing or that ever so bad. I can say it personally because as a writer, I would go to a writer's conference and somebody would hand me a really poorly written manuscript and say, God wrote every word of this. Like, no, God writes better than that. I'm pretty sure you did
That's
this.
right.
So.
That's right. Yes, I do think that that's a difficulty, and bad art exists in the secular world
course,
too.
yeah.
But the difficulty is that bad Christian art makes it more difficult for the rest of the Christian community to present great art, because the secular production world doesn't know how to distinguish us. If they have certain preconceived notions when you say I'm a Christian and I want to do a faith-based or a faith-friendly project, and they assume the worst. And so you have to come in with really strong work to say, no, look, I know what I'm doing, and I know how to reach a broader audience and give a great message at the same time.
Or better yet, come in with good work and not have to label it so that they don't even...
Well, that's the dream. Somebody asked me recently about great faith-based work, and I said, actually, my favorite faith-based filmmaker is Martin Scorsese. Now, he would not describe himself that way, but I certainly see his faith coming through in his work. And my favorite movie of all time is Man for All Seasons, which is incredibly beautiful, poetic writing and a huge historic epic, but it all pivots on a matter of faith. And I wish we made more of those kinds of movies.
That's great. That's great. Let me ask you this. Has there ever been pushback from people, from Christians, people at church or people, just within the Christian community that have said, why are you working on that show? Or if you're a Christian, how come, basically questioning your Christian credentials and looking at...
Absolutely. I was on the first 3 years of a little show called Charmed. And again, I grew up in a very supportive, arts-filled home where metaphor and parable were really important. And so I looked at Charmed as an opportunity to tell stories about how crucial a warm, supportive family was. These are 3 young women who had been given gifts by a higher power and were told to defeat evil and make the world a better place. And I thought, wow, I may never get a chance to work with this kind of metaphor again. And I was really excited. And I got tremendous pushback from people at my congregation at the time and just people in the community who were like, how can you be on a show about witches? And I said, well, but that's not what the show is to me. And, even now, many years past my time on the show, people will see that on my resume when I'm dealing with more faith-oriented projects. And I have been genuinely grilled about my faith and how I could allow myself to be on a show that was about witchcraft. And I said, it's not about witchcraft. The witchcraft was a metaphor. But
in the same way Aslan is a metaphor,
and it's just some people have a very narrow view of what Christian artists should be. But what we forget in the Christian community, and I think we do ourselves tremendous harm in this way, is that that's a huge tent. And as a Lutheran, I know I'm over on the left, but I got stories to tell, and there's an audience over there, just like there's an audience over on the right, and they deserve their stories too.
Let's talk about the Charmed. You got all this pushback. Your first episode came out, and you got a letter back. Tell me about that.
Okay, this, not to date myself, but this was when people still wrote letters. Social media was just taking off. And we genuinely got letters. I mean, obviously the girls got straight up fan mail.
Sure.
But the writing staff got letters too. And my first episode was about the girls meeting an ancestress. And it was one of several time travel episodes that I did. I'm a huge sci-fi geek. And I got a letter from a woman who said that she had seen the episode and had been so moved by the girls connecting with this ancestress that she had picked up the phone and called her mother, who she'd been estranged from for 7 years. Wow. And she and her mother and her sister were going to have dinner together.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, that's why I'm here. Maybe it's time to go home now. But that is always in my mind now with everything I write. Maybe this will touch the heart of someone who really needs it. And maybe that's why I have been brought to this place to write this episode in this moment.
That's also the power of good art, right?
Absolutely.
This is a time-traveling show about an ancestor, the witches, the whole bit, but somebody else saw something about forgiveness in it and felt important enough to move on that.
Yeah, and it was an episode about this is your legacy and this is why you need to fight for good and why you need to love and support each other, and whatever piece of that resonated with her, I'm just so grateful that she reached out and did something about it.
Yeah. It seems, you don't seem this way, but I could see how maybe a younger or less mature person could be, could be almost lonely in the middle there. You know, as you're trying to move forward in Hollywood and make an impact and produce the kinds of shows and movies and things that you want to produce. And at the same time, sometimes the church doesn't understand, or maybe in the past didn't understand what you're doing. It seems like there's this middle ground where it can be pretty lonely right there in the middle.
Well, I mean, writing is lonely because at some point it's just you and the screen, right? But to me, it's very important for my emotional and spiritual and artistic survival to have good people in my life. My family, my friends at church, my friends in the writing community, and now my friends in the teaching community, where we can support each other and pray for each other. And I mean, and I do have friends who are less spiritual that, you know, we can just compare artistic grievances.
Right.
But the people I really cherish are the people with whom I can share those artistic grievances and then pray.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And that's something we all need is community in some sort. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to ask Sheryl one final question. It's going to involve a metaphor about a sparrow. Stay tuned, and you'll hear that when you get back. We're back with Sheryl Anderson. I just wanted you to share a little story you told me, a little metaphor about a sparrow. Can you tell me about that?
It is actually an Israeli folktale, but to me it's a parable about artists, and certainly artists of faith. A horse is walking down the road and he finds a sparrow lying on its back with its feet up in the air. And the horse says to the sparrow, "Little friend, what is wrong?" And the sparrow said, "Haven't you heard? The sky's going to fall." And the horse says, "Well, then let's go seek shelter." And the sparrow said, "No, I am here to help hold up the sky." And the horse looks at the sparrow in disbelief and says, "The sky is going to fall. And you, with your little legs, you think you can help hold up the sky?" And the sparrow says, "Friend, one does what one can. One does what one can."
And I think that perfectly sums up what you're doing in Hollywood. And we appreciate so much just your sharing candidly some of the things that have happened with you and the work that you do. I think
thank you.
as an audience and as folks in Atlanta or the Southeast, as we're watching this, we don't often have contact with entertainment folks from Hollywood. We don't know the struggles that they go through and the kinds of things that they're doing. Sometimes they're just holding up the sky for the rest of us. So we're so thankful that you were a part of the show today. We're so thankful that you got to see Cheryl, and hopefully you'll be watching out for some of her shows to appear on the network television and Up Channel and Hallmark and Lifetime and all of those shows very soon. Thanks for being a part of the show today. We're so glad you were here, and join us next time on Right Now.